Officer, just so you know, the window isn't working. The motor's been out.
License and registration, roll the window down.
I just told you, the window won't go down. Motor fault. I can pass my documents through the
Officer Benton Crail had filed 14 use of force reports in 3 years. And not once had he been disciplined by the Morrow County Police Department. When he lit up a late model Lexus on the empty stretch of Dunhill Crossing just past 1 a.m., he expected the usual. He didn't expect resistance. He didn't expect questions. So he did what he always did when someone didn't immediately comply. He escalated. What Officer Crail didn't know was that the man inside that car held a medical license, a spotless record, and enough evidence on camera to bring down not just him, but the entire command structure protecting him. Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where you're tuning in from here at Deep Truth. If you believe that a badge should never be a weapon, hit the like button and subscribe. This story is exactly why this channel exists. It was 12:51 in the morning when Dr. Darius Elmont finally pulled out of the staff parking structure at Greystone Memorial Hospital on the corner of Halcyon Avenue and West 38th Street in Morrow County. He was 39 years old, a board-certified cardiothoracic surgeon with 11 years of practice, and he was exhausted in the particular way that only a 16-hour shift can produce. The kind of tired that sits behind your eyes and makes the yellow lines on the road look like they're breathing. He had come in at 8 a.m. the previous morning for a scheduled double bypass on a 54-year-old father of 3. That surgery had run long. Then a trauma case rolled in at 4 p.m. A construction worker from the Bellevue site on Corder Road. Blunt force chest injury, collapsed lung. Darius hadn't eaten since noon. He had changed out of his scrubs, thrown on a gray hoodie and dark jeans, and climbed into his silver Lexus ES with one thing on his mind: getting home to his apartment on Fenmore Court, 12 minutes away, and sleeping until his body decided it was done. He turned onto Dunhill Crossing just after the light at Prescott and headed north. Dunhill Crossing was one of those roads that felt abandoned after midnight. A long, flat stretch bordered by a chain-link fenced lot on the left and a row of closed auto shops on the right. The kind of businesses with hand-painted signs and security cameras that may or may not have been recording. There was almost no traffic. Darius had his music low. Something instrumental. Something that wouldn't require any thought. He was doing 31 miles per hour in a 30 zone. Not speeding, not swerving. Both hands on the wheel, seatbelt on, just a man driving home from work. That's when the blue and red lights filled his rearview mirror. Darius let out a slow breath through his nose. He didn't panic. He'd been pulled over before, twice in the last 4 years, both times in this county, both times for reasons that were never fully explained to him. He knew the protocol. He put his hazard lights on, reduced his speed gradually, and pulled to the right side of Dunhill Crossing near the entrance of Kellard Auto Body at 4712 Dunhill Crossing. He put the car in park. He turned the music off. He placed both hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2 and waited. What Darius did not yet know was that the officer sitting in the patrol car behind him was Colt Fenwick, a 7-year veteran of the Morrow County Police Department assigned to the overnight patrol district that covered the Harwick and Dunhill corridors. Colt Fenwick was 33 years old, broad-shouldered, with the kind of flat expression that people sometimes mistake for professionalism, but is really just the absence of doubt. He had joined the department after 2 years at Calverton Community College and a brief, unremarkable stint as a private security guard at the Morrow County Mall on Eastbridge Drive. He had a wife, a truck, and a mortgage on a house in the Sycamore Glen subdivision. On paper, he was ordinary. But paper doesn't always tell the full story. Fenwick had a reputation among his fellow officers. Not one that was spoken about loudly, but one that existed in the way reputations do inside precincts. In sideways glances, in the way certain officers made sure they weren't paired with him, in the way complaints seemed to move through the department's review process like water through sand, slowly and then gone. He had been the subject of 3 formal civilian complaints in the past 2 years alone, all involving black male drivers stopped in the Dunhill and Harwick corridors, all involving allegations of unnecessary aggression. One man claimed Fenwick had pulled him from his vehicle without cause. Another said Fenwick had thrown his registration back at him and told him to learn how to drive in this neighborhood. All 3 complaints had landed on the desk of Lieutenant Aldous Wren, the commanding officer of the overnight division at the 9th Precinct on Vantage Boulevard. And all 3 had been closed without formal discipline. Wren had been with the department for 22 years. He was 6 months from retirement. He had a particular talent for making paperwork disappear without technically violating any written policy, and Fenwick knew it. Everyone knew it. Fenwick ran the Lexus plates before he stepped out of the car. The vehicle came back clean, registered to Darius A. in Elmont. No warrants, no priors, valid insurance. There was no legal basis for the stop beyond the fact that Fenwick had been sitting at the intersection of Dunhill and Prescott for 40 minutes watching cars pass, and something about this one, the hour, the driver, the neighborhood, had made him reach for his lights. He stepped out of the patrol car anyway. He approached the driver's side with his flashlight already on, cutting the beam across the back window before he even reached the door. Darius could see the light tracking over the interior of his car and kept his hands on the wheel, fingers spread. He was calm. He was cooperative. He had done nothing wrong and he knew it, which meant the only tool he had was patience. Fenwick reached the window and rapped on the glass with his knuckle. Sharp, impatient, the knock of someone who expected the door to open before they finished knocking. Darius reached for the window button. Nothing happened. The driver's side window on his Lexus had been malfunctioning for about a week. A known issue with the ES model's window regulator motor, something he'd already scheduled at Hargrove Lexus Service Center on Clemens Pike for the following Thursday. The window would respond, but slowly, and sometimes it needed a second press. He pressed it again. The glass moved about 2 inches and stalled. "Sir, roll your window down," Fenwick said. "I'm trying to," Darius said clearly, his voice even. "The window's been acting up. Give me just 1 second." He pressed the button again. The window moved another inch. "I said roll it down, now." "Officer, I hear you. The motor is faulty. I have a service appointment scheduled. I'm not being difficult. I just need a moment." That word, moment, seemed to land wrong. Fenwick's jaw tightened. He took a half step back from the door, and for just a second, Darius thought the officer was going to wait. He thought this was going to be the part where common sense interrupted. He pressed the button one more time, and the window was almost halfway down. The baton came fast and without warning. Fenwick swung it against the driver's side window with enough force that the glass didn't crack. It exploded. Shards came inward. Darius threw his right arm up instinctively, and a jagged piece caught the back of his hand just below the knuckle line, the hand he used to operate. He made a sound that wasn't quite a word, pulled his arm back, and looked down at the blood already rising across his fingers. "Step out of the vehicle," Fenwick said, as if nothing had happened, as if the glass wasn't on the seat, as if a man wasn't bleeding. "I'm bleeding," Darius said. His voice had changed. Not panicked, but stripped of everything except the fact. "You broke the window. I'm bleeding. You were non-compliant. Step out of the vehicle." What neither of them had fully registered yet was that Fenwick's body cam had been recording since the moment he stepped out of the patrol car. And mounted on the corner of the chain-link fence at 4712 Dunhill Crossing, the one belonging to Kellard Auto Body, was a weathered but fully functional exterior security camera that had a direct sight line to exactly where the silver Lexus was parked. The night wasn't over. But for Colt Fenwick, it had already ended. He just didn't know it yet. Darius Elmont did not scream. He did not reach for the door handle in a panic or try to drive away. He sat in his seat with glass on his lap and blood running down the back of his right hand. And he did the only thing his training had ever taught him to do when something went wrong. He stayed calm and he assessed the damage. That was the surgeon in him. Even when his own body was the one bleeding, the instinct was to look at the wound clearly, understand what was happening, and figure out the next step. The cut across his knuckles was about 2 inches long and deep enough to matter. His hand was already throbbing with the kind of sharp, specific pain that told him this wasn't superficial. He pressed his left hand over it and looked up at Colt Fenwick, who was standing outside the shattered window with his baton still in his hand and no apology anywhere on his face. "I need you to step out of the vehicle," Fenwick said again. Same tone, same flat delivery. Like the last 60 seconds hadn't happened the way they happened. Darius spoke carefully. "Officer, I am a physician. I was just released from a shift at Greystone Memorial Hospital less than 15 minutes ago. I complied with your stop. I pulled over immediately, and my window has a mechanical fault that I explained to you. You struck my window without warning, and I am now injured. I need you to understand what just happened here." Fenwick didn't respond to any of that. He reached through the broken window frame, unlocked the door from the inside, and pulled it open. "Out of the car," he said. There was a second officer present by this point. He had arrived about 90 seconds after the window shattered. A younger officer named Cyrus Taft, 26 years old, 14 months on the job, who had been running a parallel patrol on the Harwick side when Fenwick's stop appeared on the dispatch screen. Taft pulled up behind Fenwick's cruiser, stepped out, and walked toward the Lexus with the careful energy of someone who could already tell the situation was not clean. He looked at the glass on the ground. He looked at Darius's hand. He looked at Fenwick, and then he did what junior officers in that department had learned to do when Fenwick was involved. He said nothing, and he stayed back. Darius stepped out of the car slowly, keeping his injured hand elevated slightly and his left hand visible. He was in a gray hoodie and jeans, and there was blood on his sleeve now. He stood on the sidewalk in front of Kellard Auto Body and told Fenwick again, steadily, that he needed medical attention and that he wanted to explain who he was and where he was coming from. Fenwick told him to turn around and put his hands behind his back. Darius asked why he was being detained. Fenwick said he had been non-compliant and that the situation needed to be controlled before anything else was discussed. Darius put his hands behind his back because the alternative was not an option he was willing to consider on a dark street at 1 in the morning with no one around who was going to help him. Fenwick did not arrest him. He put him in a loose hold and walked him to the rear of the Lexus and told him to stand there while he went back to his patrol car. No handcuffs, no formal detention language, no explanation. Just a man with a badge deciding the pace and terms of everything, while the man he had just injured stood on a sidewalk bleeding through his fingers. What Fenwick wrote in his incident report later that night was a version of events that required a certain kind of reader, the kind who didn't ask questions. He wrote that the driver had been slow to respond to commands, that the window situation had created an obstruction to the lawful execution of his duties, and that he had used his baton to clear the obstruction after repeated requests went unheeded. He wrote that the driver had become agitated. He used the word non-compliant 4 times in 11 sentences. He did not mention that the driver was a surgeon. He did not mention that the driver had explained the window malfunction before the baton came out. He did not mention the injury to the hand in any significant way. He noted it briefly at the end, in one line, as a minor abrasion sustained during the stop. Cyrus Taft co-signed the report as a witnessing officer without adding any additional comments. By the time Darius was allowed to leave the scene, it was nearly 2:15 in the morning. Fenwick had run his license, run his plates again, and eventually handed him back his documents without a ticket, without a formal charge, and without any acknowledgement that what had occurred was anything other than a routine stop that had gotten complicated. Darius drove himself, with one injured hand and glass still in the seams of his seat, back to Greystone Memorial Hospital. Not as a patient arriving in a panic, but as a man who walked through the staff entrance, found a colleague in the emergency department, and had the wound on his hand properly cleaned and closed. 3 sutures. The attending physician on duty that night, Dr. Simone Adesanya, who had worked alongside Darius for 6 years, looked at his hand and then looked at his face and asked him what happened. He told her. She didn't say much. She finished the sutures and then she took photographs of the wound on her phone because Darius asked her to, and because she understood without being told why documentation mattered right now. The next morning, Darius called a medical malpractice and civil rights attorney named Nkichi Bramble, who whose office was located on the 14th floor of the Caldwell Professional Building on Stanhope Street downtown. He had never needed her services before, but a colleague had mentioned her name once in the context of exactly this kind of situation, and Darius had written it down. Nkechi listened to the full account without interrupting. When he finished, she asked him 2 questions. The first was whether the officer had been wearing a body cam. Darius said he believed so. The second was whether there were any other cameras in the area. Darius told her about Kellard Auto Body, the fence-mounted camera he had noticed in the brief moment after the glass had come in. Nkechi told him not to contact the police department directly, and not to speak to anyone from the department if they called. She told him to get copies of his hospital records from the previous night's shift to establish where he had been, and to get the suture documentation from Dr. Adesanya. Then she told him she would file a formal complaint with the Morrow County Police Department by end of business that day, and begin the process of requesting all available footage under open records law. The complaint landed on Lieutenant Aldous Wren's desk at 4:47 that afternoon. Wren read it. He set it down. He had seen complaints about Fenwick before, and he had managed them the way he always had. Carefully, slowly, with enough procedural language to make inaction look like process. But this one was different, and he could feel that immediately. A physician. A named attorney. A formal records request for body cam footage filed the same day as the incident. Wren picked up the phone and called Fenwick. He didn't ask him what happened. He asked him whether his camera had been on. Fenwick said yes. There was a pause on the line that lasted longer than it should have. Wren told him to come in early the next morning. He didn't say why. He didn't need to. The footage hadn't been reviewed yet. The complaint hadn't gone public yet. But something had already shifted, the way pressure shifts in a room before anyone opens a window. Everything that had been protected by silence and slow paperwork was about to meet something neither Fenwick nor Wren had properly prepared for. Evidence that didn't need anyone to believe it. Evidence that simply showed what happened. The body cam footage was pulled from the department's server on a Tuesday morning by an IT administrator named Gerald Foss, who had worked for the Morrow County Police Department for 9 years and had never once been asked to pull footage this quickly after a formal records request. Nkechi Bramble's legal filing had included a preservation order, which meant the department was legally required to protect the footage from any alteration or deletion from the moment the request was received. Gerald knew what a preservation order meant. He also knew that Lieutenant Aldous Wren had been in the building since 6 that morning, which was 2 hours before his usual arrival time. Gerald pulled the footage, logged it, and said nothing to anyone. Nkechi received the files 48 hours later. She watched the body cam footage alone in her office on a Wednesday evening with the door closed. She watched it once at full speed. Then she went back and watched it again at half speed, and this time she took notes. The footage was 114 seconds long from the moment Fenwick stepped out of his patrol car to the moment the window shattered. It did not show what Fenwick's report described. It did not show a non-compliant driver. It did not show an obstruction. What it showed was a man with both hands on a steering wheel, a window moving slowly but visibly moving, a clear verbal explanation being given, and then a baton swinging before the window had even stopped attempting to open. The strike came at the 67th second. Darius's arm came up at 68. The footage was not ambiguous. It was not open to interpretation. It was just a recording of what happened, and what happened had nothing to do with the report Colt Fenwick had filed. But the body cam footage was only the first layer. Nkechi's investigator had contacted Kellard Auto Body 3 days after the incident. The owner, a man named Pete Rourke, who had run that shop on Dunhill Crossing for 19 years, confirmed that his exterior camera was functional and had been recording continuously on a motion-triggered loop that saved and stored footage for 30 days to a cloud-based system he had set up after a break-in 2 years prior. Pete Rourke did not need a subpoena. When Nkechi's investigator explained what they were looking for and why, Rourke pulled the footage himself and handed it over the same afternoon. He had watched it before he sent it. He didn't say much about what he saw, but when the investigator thanked him, Rourke said simply that he had a son who was 24 years old and drove a dark car, and that was all he said. The Kellard camera angle was wide and slightly elevated, mounted at the corner of the building's roofline. It captured the entire stop from a perspective the body cam couldn't provide a full view of Fenwick's body, his positioning, his movement, and the timing of every action he took. When Nkechi laid the two recordings side by side on her editing software, synced to the same timestamp, what she had was not just evidence. It was a complete dismantling of every word in Colt Fenwick's incident report. The Kellard footage showed Fenwick stepping back from the window not to give Darius space to comply, but to create distance before the strike. The motion was deliberate. It was the movement of someone who had already made a decision. The window was still moving when the baton came down. Nkechi filed the civil lawsuit against Colt Fenwick and the Morrow County Police Department on a Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, a local news producer at WKMR Channel 7 had received a tip. By Friday evening, the story was running. By Saturday morning, both recordings had been obtained by 3 separate media outlets and were playing on a loop across every local broadcast and most national ones. The public saw what Nkechi had seen: a surgeon, a faulty window, an explanation, a baton, and a report that called it non-compliance. The department released a statement Saturday afternoon saying the incident was under internal review and that it would be inappropriate to comment on active litigation. The statement used the words thorough and transparent and committed to accountability. It did not mention the 14 prior use of force reports. It did not mention the 3 civilian complaints that had been closed without discipline. It did not mention Lieutenant Aldous Wren, but someone else did. A former officer named Dale Cutler, who had left the Morrow County Department 18 months earlier and relocated to a job in a neighboring county, gave a recorded interview to WWKMR on Sunday. He did not shout. He did not perform outrage. He spoke in the flat, steady tone of someone who had been waiting for the right moment to say something true. He said that complaints about Fenwick had been known inside the precinct for years. He said that Lieutenant Wren had a practice of sitting on paperwork until complainants gave up or moved away. He said that at least 2 other officers had raised concerns internally and been quietly reassigned. He said none of this was a secret inside that building. It was just never supposed to become a secret outside of it. By Monday morning, the story had a second layer that the department had no statement prepared for. Darius Elmont gave one interview. He sat across from a journalist at a table, his right hand resting in front of him, the 3 suture marks still visible across his knuckles. He did not talk about anger. He talked about the 16-hour shift. He talked about the patients he had treated that night. He talked about sitting on that sidewalk on Dunhill Crossing with glass on his clothes, asking for a reason and not getting one. He said he didn't want to be a symbol. He said he just wanted what the footage already proved, that what happened, happened. That the report was false. That someone had tried to rewrite 67 seconds of reality with a paragraph of paperwork, and that it hadn't worked. The footage had already made sure of that. Colt Fenwick was placed on administrative leave the same Monday the story went national. The department announced it in a 2-sentence press release that said almost nothing, and was designed to say almost nothing, the kind of statement institutions produce when they are reacting to public pressure rather than acting on principle. There was no apology in it. There was no acknowledgement of what the footage showed. There was just the word leave and the phrase pending investigation and a period at the end that was supposed to make it feel final when it was really just the beginning of something the department had no roadmap for. The internal affairs investigation that followed was not the same kind of investigation that had swallowed the previous 3 complaints. This one had cameras watching it. Nkechi Bramble had made sure of that. Her legal filings required the department to document every step of the review process and produce records at each stage. There was no slow paperwork this time. There was no quiet reassignment. There was a file, and the file kept growing. Because once investigators were actually required to look, what they found was not isolated. It was a pattern with dates attached to it. The 14 use of force reports Fenwick had filed over 3 years were reviewed in full. 11 of them involved blackmail drivers stopped in the Dunhill and Harwick corridors, most of them late at night, most of them for stops that had no clear legal basis documented in the paperwork. 3 of those stops had also resulted in property damage or minor injuries that were listed in the reports as incidental. 2 of the men involved had filed complaints. Both complaints had been closed by Lieutenant Aldous Wren within 30 days, marked as unsubstantiated, with no interview of the complainant recorded in either file. When Internal Affairs investigators went back to contact those 2 men, one of them had kept every document from his original complaint in a folder in his kitchen drawer. He had never stopped believing someone would eventually ask. Lieutenant Aldous Wren retired abruptly on a Wednesday, 11 days after the footage went public. He submitted his retirement paperwork in the morning and was gone from the building by afternoon. The department accepted it without comment. But retirement did not close the door that the investigation had already walked through. Internal Affairs referred his handling of the prior complaints to the county prosecutor's office for review of potential misconduct in office. Wren hired an attorney by Thursday. Colt Fenwick was terminated from the Morrow County Police Department on the following Friday, 22 days after he had swung a baton through a surgeon's window on Dunhill Crossing. The termination letter cited conduct unbecoming an officer, filing a false official report, and use of excessive force. 3 days after his termination, the county prosecutor's office announced that Fenwick had been charged with second-degree assault and filing a false police report. He turned himself in at the Morrow County Courthouse on Stanhope Street on a gray Thursday morning, said nothing to the cameras waiting outside, and was released on bond by early afternoon. The civil lawsuit filed by Nkechi Bramble on behalf of Darius Elmont was settled 8 months later. The terms were not fully disclosed, but sources familiar with the agreement confirmed the settlement was substantial. The Morrow County Police Department did not admit liability in the settlement language. They rarely do. But the dollar amount and the speed of the agreement said everything the words refused to. Darius donated a portion of the settlement to a legal defense fund for civilians who couldn't afford representation in excessive force cases. He did it quietly, without a press conference. His name appeared in the fund's acknowledgement section in small print, the way he wanted it. The department announced a reform package 6 weeks after the footage went public, under pressure from the county council and a coalition of community organizations that had been pushing for oversight changes for years before Darius Elmont's name was ever in a headline. The reforms included mandatory supervisory review of all use-of-force reports within 72 hours, an independent civilian complaint review board with actual subpoena power, and a new policy requiring body cam footage to be reviewed by a supervisor before any use-of-force report was finalized and filed. Whether those reforms would hold, whether they would be enforced with the same energy they were announced with, was a question that only time would answer. Communities that had been here before knew better than to call it a victory, before the ink had dried and stayed dried. Cyrus Taft, the young officer who had stood on that sidewalk and said nothing while Darius bled, was not terminated. He was formally counseled and reassigned to a daytime district. He requested a transfer to a neighboring county's department 8 months later. It was approved. Dr. Simone Adesanya, who had closed 3 sutures on her colleague's hand at 2 in the morning and thought to take photographs before anyone asked her to, was later recognized by the county medical board for her role in preserving evidence in the case. She accepted the recognition briefly and went back to work the next morning. Darius returned to the operating room 6 weeks after the incident, once his hand had healed fully and his surgical clearance had been signed off. His first case back was a valve repair on a 61-year-old woman from the Elmhurst district. The surgery took 4 hours and 20 minutes. It went clean. He drove home that night on Dunhill Crossing because it was still the fastest route from Greystone Memorial to Fenmore Court, and he was not willing to let one man's cruelty turn a road into something he feared. He drove the speed limit, both hands on the wheel, windows still scheduled for repair. Some things a camera can fix, some things it can only record. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to see it. Every view on Deep Truth is another story that doesn't get buried. Hit the subscribe button so you never miss what we uncover next.